All right, everybody, good morning and happy Wednesday. It is 10 o'clock. Oh, it's 10:01, so I'm just a moment short. Apparently, it looked like you guys could see us talking, but believe me, we were just talking to each other. And hopefully now you all can hear us. Welcome to this, where did we go here? Bear with me. The FDM Chapter 114 update. This morning's presenter is going to be Mr. Dwayne Carver, the State Complete Streets Program Manager. Online, we also have, just in case the other voices fall in from above, Kevin McDaniel, the Roadway Design Criteria Administrator, and Mr. Michael Shepard, the State Roadway Design Engineer. So 114, this covers triple R. Like I know back in the CE in the Air Force, triple R is rapid runway repair, but this, of course, refers to resurfacing, restoration, and rehabilitation. Sounds like a complete spa package. But I'm going to turn it over to Dwayne here. Really quick before we start, we had well over 1,000 people register for this webinar. We've got over 600 right now, and the counter is rolling. So inevitably, y'all are going to, a handful of y'all are going to experience some sort of connectability issue. So if you lose audio, if your screen freezes, anything like that, please know, just disconnect and reconnect. It's the easiest way to go. So I'm going to turn it over to my friend, Mr. Dwayne, and I'm going to close this off. My man, I'm here in the background if you need me.
All right, great, thank you. And you can see my presentation starting, all right?
Yes, sir, full screen.
All right, great. I'm gonna turn off my camera. Good morning, everybody. My name is Dwayne Carver. I'm the State Complete Streets Program Manager, and I work here in the design office at Central Office at FDOT. And we wanted to talk to you this morning about a design bulletin that came out, which makes changes to the FDOT design manual for chapter.
Hang on, Dwayne, one second.
Yes, sir.
I have your full camera and I don't have the slides anymore.
You see the first slide advanced.
RDB 2201.
That's what we're going to talk about. Hey, thank you for introducing it. All right. RDB stands for Roadway Design Bulletin because we really like acronyms at the FDOT. Our Roadway Design Bulletin, the first one for this year is to amend the FDOT Design Manual, the FDM, to make some changes to our chapter on 3R processes. And so I want to talk this morning for a little bit about what some of those updates are. And Brian, you're right, that chapter is resurfacing, restoration, and rehabilitation. It is like a spa package for our state roadway system. So we come in and that's our chance to go in and change things that need to be fixed on those roadways. And we'll talk about why that's important for this effort as we go along. The bulletin that you see and the changes in FDM 114 reflect actually a process. We began the edits to this version of it this year, working with folks in the districts, and so we actually had people from the districts going in and making edits to the text itself and doing all the markups and things. But really, it stretched back even a few years back. We originally were asked by District 1 Secretary Nandum to look at what we could do on 3R projects that could help improve our safety record at the Florida DOT and work towards some of the safety goals that we had. So even back then, we began to recognize that there were opportunities that we probably were missing in our 3R projects, and we thought there might be a way to get into those and to make those more effective. And so this chapter is kind of the culmination of really several years of effort, but we did engage the districts in helping us build the edits that we have this year. And so hopefully you'll see that reflected in what we're doing here. The reason that we wanted to make these changes, what's really driven them at this point, is the department's focus on vital few safety. As you're aware, those efforts are focused on intersection safety, on lane departure safety, and also on bicycle and pedestrian safety. And there are edits that are being made to FDM 114 that support all of those things. I'll show you just a few crash numbers to help make the case on that for us. And also I want to talk this morning, really just kind of go over what things have changed. Now, this is not a line by line walkthrough of the FDM. That would be, I think, hugely boring, but also, just a little more difficult to do. So what I want to talk about is the general types of things that have changed, and so you understand where the idea came from to make a certain change in the FDM. And you can, if you want to see exactly what that language looks like, you can go look that up on your own and see what that looks like. So why are we revising the FDM in this 3R chapter? Well, as you're probably aware, FDOT uses this context classification system to kind of slice and dice our roadways into smaller bits so we can really understand what's happening with them. And when we did that, we discovered that something like 76% of our bicycle and pedestrian fatal and serious injury crashes are occurring in just two context classifications, the C3C, which is the suburban commercial, and the C4, which is the general urban conditions. So in those conditions, they're accounting for a very large number of our crashes. Now, the interesting thing about those places is, in those places, a lot of times the roads are already built out. I mean, we do some new construction there, but a lot of times when we're touching roads there, those are, especially C4, those are urban roads that are already there. Those are suburban roads that have been there for a long time in C3C. So it's not like we have a lot of new construction going on and we have the opportunity to make safety changes. A lot of times, the only time we touch these roads is through the 3R process. And so if we want to solve problems in these areas, we knew we had to look at what goes on in 3R. And it's not just bike ped. Actually, a little over half of all the fatal and serious injury crashes are actually occurring in these locations. So the other vital few safety emphasis areas for intersection safety and lane departure, those also can be affected in these areas and hopefully improved by the changes that we're making in FDM 114. So that was our goal, to try to reduce and really eliminate those fatal and serious injury crashes. And so what we want to do to help do that is to increase the number of safety elements that we can provide in 3R projects. That was sort of the goal of making these changes to FDM 114. So let's go over what some of those changes are. The general overview that kind of runs through the whole thing. One of the things that we found is that FDM 114, as it was previously written, in some ways was already a little behind the times. When we got involved with the districts a few years ago, and then we're talking to them continuously up until this year, we found that the districts had already begun making changes in how they were implementing these safety efforts on 3R projects. And we wanted to update FDM 114 to be consistent with that. We also wanted to clarify the elements that would be expected to be included in 3R projects. This was very important because the work program instructions really just say, go see FDM 114 to find out what you can do on a 3R project. And so we needed to be very clear within FDM 114 what kinds of things we were expecting to be done on these 3R projects. And there's actually kind of a trick to that. We'll show you in a minute. But so that was one of the reasons that kind of drove this, was to make sure the chapter was as clear as possible what kinds of elements we could include. So we identified additional safety elements as a part of that process that we would include on there, and I'll talk about what some of those are. And we also recognized that we needed to identify some additional processes and practices. Now, some of these may seem like brand new processes, but for other districts, they may seem like, oh, we're already doing that. Well, you already are doing that, and that's why we included it here, because we found the ideas that were working well in the districts to advance our safety needs, and we wanted to make sure that those become more of a standard practice. And so we've identified some of those in here and recommended those, in some places maybe even required those, to support integrating safety elements into the 3R projects. Okay. And you'll see some themes kind of covered throughout here. One is that there's a new district safety administrator position, so we want to incorporate that person into the 3R process as fully as possible. Also, the district safety engineers kind of always be there, will continue to be there. We'll make sure we're coordinating with that person as fully as possible. We wanted to recognize something called the safe system approach, and this has actually been promoted by FHWA. And this is their safe system strategic plan, which just came out like this week, I think. And so we already had that access to that information. So we've included that approach into what we're doing as well, to make sure that what we're doing at FDOT is consistent with what's being done at the national level as well. It also wants to be consistent with our strategic highway safety plan that FDOT has. We want to be consistent with the Target Zero effort that FDOT has. And there's that FHWA safety plan. And another theme that was included in FDM 114 with these edits is to have greater interaction with other offices. What we're recognizing is, remember where those crashes are taking place in C3C and C4. Those are urban conditions. There's a lot going on in urban conditions. We can't look at the roadway in isolation from everything else. So we want to make sure we're talking to the other offices that need to be engaged. And so we included some of that language in here we'll show you where some of that is. So the safe systems approach is pretty important to understand if you want to understand why we made these changes to FDM 114. So the definition, I'm going to read it as: the safe system approach aims to eliminate fatalities and serious injuries of all users of the transportation system through a holistic model of multiple elements working together to safeguard against tragic crash outcomes. So some key things in there. We are working to eliminate these fatalities and serious injuries. That's our target zero approach. We're looking at all the different users. And so you'll see that we've increased the attention, if you will, of some of the users that maybe we've not paid as much attention to in the past that we know that we need to. And this holistic idea is very important as well, because it recognizes that you can't do this just through traffic operations and safety. You can't do it just through roadway design. You've got to have planning involved. You've got to have all the other folks at the table that make this thing happen. You have to understand the context of where you're working. So we really like this safe systems approach definition. And so that's what really is kind of driving the changes now to FDM 114. So just real quickly, there's 6 parts of the safe systems approach. If you're not familiar with it, the first part is that fatalities and serious injuries are unacceptable. So we don't want to have trade-offs. Oh, it's okay, we can have some, we're going to accept some of these fatalities and serious injuries. We're taking the approach, the only good answer is 0. We want 0 of these things. However, we also have to recognize human beings do make mistakes. And so we can't have systems out there that will only work if nobody makes a mistake. That's not going to be a very viable system when you're dealing with human beings, because we all make mistakes. We recognize that humans are vulnerable. When humans are in crashes, bad things happen. So we can't assume that the people who are out there are going to be okay if they're in a crash. We got to eliminate the crashes, and we assume that the humans are vulnerable, and so we want to reduce the energy of the crash as much as possible. We recognize in a safe systems approach that responsibility is shared. We can't have the finger pointing about, well, they shouldn't have crossed there, or that road shouldn't have been designed so fast, or whatever it might be. Everybody shares some responsibility for making the roadways safe. That's a key tenet of the safe systems approach. We have to recognize that safety is proactive. For a long time, I know I was brought up in kind of the safety culture. Safety means you go out and you look at crash numbers and you see where the hot spots are and all those things. We're going to continue to do those things. Those are an important part of safety, but safe systems approach recognizes that in and of itself is not going to get us there. You have to look ahead and see what's happening. And FDM 114 is designed to help us do that as much as possible, so we can be proactive about our safety approaches. Also recognizing the last but not least is that redundancy is crucial. So we can't assume that one thing is going to take care of one safety intervention is going to solve the whole problem. We need to layer these things together. So we're not going to allow, for instance, to have high-speed roadways in places that really should be low speed and say, well, we'll just hope everybody uses the crosswalk and uses the signals. We have to layer those things together. Let's provide adequate crosswalks, signals, and lighting, and make sure the speed is good. Let's do education to make folks know how to use these facilities. So that redundancy is really important in the safe systems approach. So now we'll kind of walk through some of the things that are changed in there. So one of the things that we changed in the FDM 114, now this actually was in FDM 114 before, but a lot of folks didn't catch it. But basically, within the FDM itself, whenever you go into any chapter in the FDM, on a 3R project, the assumption is you're using the new construction criteria unless there is a specific language in that chapter, in that section, that says, except for 3R, you do this or that. If it doesn't have a carve out for 3R, then you're expected to use the new construction criteria. That's part of the safety that should be built into the 3R process. That I don't think has always been clear. So we wanted to make that as clear as we could in FDM 114, that you're expected to use these new construction criteria on 3R projects unless there's some carve out for it within the chapter itself. Part of the confusion for this, I think, comes from in the old plans preparation manual, there was a chapter 25, and in that chapter, we had loaded everything that went into a 3R project. And if you wanted to know how to do 3R, you went to that chapter, and that had everything in there supposed to be on 3R. I think a lot of folks have been trying to use FDM 114 in the same way, but that's really not going to work, because the FDM is not your father's PPM. We have a different way of doing things now. And essentially, all the criteria for 3R are scattered all throughout the FDM. So you just use it there unless it's specifically called out. So you don't have to go just to FDM 114 to get the 3R criteria. They're already everywhere else in the FDM. So we added some things to there's a list in the FDM about, in FDM 114 about things that require a director level approval if they're not in the 3R projects. And I'm going to show you what that looks like in just a second. But the things that we added to it, we have something now called the Safety Needs List Dashboard. This is a ongoing punch list, if you will, of projects that the districts are identifying that need to be dealt with whenever we have the opportunity to deal with them. And so if the district identifies something, and it could be an existing safety problem, it could be a safety problem that they have recognized is going to occur because of a particular kind of design. So it could be either reactive safety or proactive safety, whatever it is, it will go on the safety needs dashboard, and that is our kind of master list. And so that's what we're going to be trying to work toward. So anything that's on that list, we need to be addressing it on a 3R project. If there are bicycle or pedestrian facilities that are needed to meet these FDM requirements, that's got to be addressed on 3R now. And if there's lighting needs that need to be addressed, that has to be addressed now. So these are three things that are now in on this list before. So I wanted to show you what this is the actual language now in the FDM. And I wanted to make the point that these three things we added, this is the new things we added. These things were already there. And what this language is saying is that when you were scoping your 3R project, you need to have all these things in the scope. If one of these things is not going to be provided in the scope, you have to go up and have someone at the director level basically sign off that we're not going to have this particular thing in the scope. And again, this has really always been the case, but it's been the case for these items here. We simply added these three items to it as well. So the notion here is to if you have an additional level of scrutiny if you're not going to be providing these things that are important to advancing safety, particularly in these C3C and C4 areas. As we're planning and programming the 3R projects, we added some new direction so that we can begin to identify any potential modifications that may be needed to meet, for instance, future conditions. So we recognize we only resurface the roads every 10 to 12, 15 years. We need to be looking ahead a little bit and thinking what might change before the next time we're here. And if we can make changes to accommodate that, let's try to do that as well. So we added direction to take a look at that and see if that's something that can be done. We found most districts are already doing that. So this is one of those situations where we kind of updated the language to match what the districts already seem to be doing. Another thing the districts are doing is identifying potential bicycle, pedestrian, transit, and speed management needs. So we rolled that in there as well. Hey, you're already doing it. Let's make it bless it and go ahead and put it in the document. We added language requiring early coordination with the district safety engineer and or the district safety administrator so that we can make sure that we have the time and resources to accomplish these safety needs on 3R projects. And if we don't have those time and resources, how are we going to deal with that? What other ways can we address these safety problems? One big change that we made in the FDM is to change some of the things that warrant right-of-way acquisition. So for example, we now are saying that there may be situations where you need to buy a little bit of right-of-way to provide these bicycle and pedestrian facilities. Same kind of thing might happen for speed management countermeasures. And so that's a little confusing, so I wanted to provide a little more information on it. So what the FDM now says is that you can purchase right-of-way for these items. And this is the actual language itself. We already could purchase a little bit of right-of-way for some of these other elements, these 3, 4, 5, and 6, and we added here that we can now purchase some right-of-way for pedestrian and bicycle and speed management countermeasures. Now, how much right-of-way can we purchase and all those things? Those are great questions. The idea here is not that you're going out and purchasing a huge amount of right-of-way, so much that's going to change it from a 3R project to a PD&E or a project or something like this, change the scope of work. It means if you need to buy a corner clip, if you need to buy a little strip here and there to fill in a sidewalk gap, you can do that now. And that really was not as clear cut before that you could do that before. Now, it does not mean that you have the money to do that. It does not mean that you have the time in your schedule to do that, to go out and make all those negotiations and make that happen. It just says that if you do have the money and the time and you're able to do it, you can now do it on a 3R project. It's not anything that's out of the ordinary. In fact, you should do it if you need it to be done and you can do it. Go ahead and do that. And of course, if you are planning to do anything with right-of-way, you want to always contact your district right-of-way office for that. Some other changes that we made. The survey levels, and sorry, you have to really kind of be in the weeds on this sometimes to understand some aspects of this, but basically we added a provision that you can do a level 2 survey if you're adding bicycle pedestrian facilities. The level 2 survey, there's different levels of surveys, and the level 2 survey is the kind that seems to be most commonly conducted on 3R projects. When we looked at the language for that, we realized that if my project was really mostly focused on adding some bicycle pedestrian facilities, I was not specifically covered to do a level 2 survey for that. We just changed that to say, yes, you can also do a level 2 survey if you need to do those kinds of activities. We added some things to the design process for 3R. So one of the things we recognized last year, we added some language to determine a target speed in FDM 201. We needed to match that language now in FDM 114, so that's now included in FDM 114. We added this language about the safety needs dashboard, which I already talked about. And also, if you need to make changes that are in line with the safe systems approach, you can add those to the design process as well. That means it's not just something where I have a crash history there. Safe systems approach says, well, if I can identify a problem that's going to be a crash in the future, I might need to go ahead and address that now. That's proactive safety. So we can go ahead and roll those kind of projects in there as well. One thing that's kind of been missing is gaps. So sometimes we have gaps in bicycle and pedestrian facilities, and so we want to make sure that we can recognize those now and begin to fill those in. If we need to go get right-of-way, now we can go get right-of-way. If we know that we can do that and begin planning for that far enough in advance. Here's just an example. We have these in a lot of places in Florida, where we have a sidewalk that was up for whatever reason. It was missing here, and then it picks up again down there. You know, for a pedestrian or for someone in a wheelchair, this is almost insurmountable. This is a real problem here. You can see where folks are kind of walking in the grass to get there, but it's not really the level that we want to see. So you can see that the travel lane does not start and stop, it's continuous. So we need to have the same kinds of continuity for our other facilities as well. Some of the other changes we made, we clarified in the 3R design process that there's an operational assessment that's called for in there, and so we want to make it clear that if you want to look at alternative intersection designs to improve bicycle and pedestrian safety, you can look at that as part of this process as well. Again, you can look at that. We're not saying you have to look at that, but we're saying if it's an opportunity to use some of these designs, don't feel like you can't do it just because it's a 3R project. It's specifically called out. Yes, you can look at those things and try to figure out a better way to fix that. We added some other office reviews that have to be done. So when you're in your office and you're trying to see what kinds of things need to be considered on the project, you need to look at the project level context classification, look at red light running, queue buildup and split failures. We're asking you to take a look at district and local plans, major permits or projects in the area. Again, this is something that's being done for the most part as part of the context classification review that's already being done on all of our projects. So this isn't necessarily new things to do. It's more recognizing in FDM 114 that these are things that are being done and just sort of helping legitimize those efforts that the districts are doing now to deliver safer and better projects. We expanded a little bit on that safety needs assessment. The safety needs dashboard did not exist before, so we want to incorporate that in there. We also are now allowing you to evaluate based on proactive safety measures, and we're asking that copies of that safety assessment with the written recommendations go to the district safety administrator or the district safety engineer, depending on which your district is using, to make sure that that safety captain, if you will, is aware of whatever the safety issues are on the project and that we're addressing them in the best way that we can. Recognizing it's a 3R project, funds are limited, you may not be able to pay for everything and do everything we'd like to have done, but if we can recognize it and address it the best that we can, that's the goal of this. We added some items to the field review section of the chapter. We want you to go out and verify there are these pedestrian and bicycle connectivity gaps. Where are the crossing locations? Maybe we need new mid-block crossings. Maybe we need new crossings at intersections to be marked, that kind of thing. So we actually spelled out in there that that should be done. Again, a lot of districts are already doing this. We recommend a nighttime review to look at the lighting to make sure how's it actually working at night. It says one thing on the plan when you look at it, but when you go out and discover that, you know, some of the luminaires are not working the way we thought they were, or they're out of warranty, whatever might happen, you just need to look at that at night to see what's going on with that. You can look at the signalization, specifically looking at, you know, is it adequate for pedestrians and cyclists, for instance. There's a no passing zone requirement in FDM 230. We call that out and say, hey, make sure, especially this is really more for a rural condition, but make sure if you need to do this no passing zone study that that's covered as well. One thing to look for in the field reviews is there evidence of informal pedestrian movements or paths or crossing behavior? So as you're out there in the corridor, are you seeing pedestrians darting across the road at particular locations? You know, is there a pattern to that? Are you seeing the kind of goat paths along the side of the road like we were showing a couple slides back? That kind of thing needs to be recognized and look for that specifically in your field reviews. Now, again, a lot of districts are already looking at this stuff. It was not covered in this chapter though, so we've included it. Okay, so there's a list in there of commonly identified improvements that are commonly done on 3R projects. This doesn't mean you can't do an uncommon one, but it's just saying these are things that are commonly done. And so if it gives you more comfort to know that they're listed there and they're, you know, everybody else is doing them, then you should feel comfortable about doing them as well if they need to be done. So some of the things we talked about in there for that are things like providing new or upgraded pedestrian and bicycle facilities, providing new or upgraded pedestrian crossings, maybe adjusting the corridor speed to reflect changing development conditions or changing safety needs. And this is that whole speed management process that begins in FDM 201 when we talk about setting a target speed in order to get to a design speed. So that all needs to be recognized in FDM 114 as well, and now it is with these changes. Some other items that we added in there for determining when you need a traffic engineering study. And so do we need, for instance, a protected intersection? Is there a potential for that? If that's the case, then we would consider that as part of the, you can do a traffic engineering study to determine that. Is there a history of angle crashes or red light running? If there is, then we might want to consider doing a traffic study for that. And again, these are things a lot of districts are already doing, but now they're specifically spelled out in the document. We want to clarify some of the issues on lighting. So if you go into the lighting chapters, FDM 231, and some of it's also mentioned in FDM 222, which is the pedestrian chapter, they talk in there about lighting. It wasn't always clear what could be done on a 3R for lighting, and so we wanted to clarify that a little bit. And so basically we just said that if you have it on a 3R project, if you have a roundabout or mid-block crossing, that you can use the 3R project to help with the lighting on those situations. So you're supposed to have lighting on those types of crossings in those types of facilities. And so the FDM 114 makes it clear that you can do that as part of your 3R. So really what this is just trying to clean up FDM 114, make it consistent with other parts of the FDM that had kind of already been settled. And that's really what I think this change here is doing. So since we released the bulletin, we have had a few frequently asked questions. Folks want to know a little more about what's going on with this director sign-off issue. I had some questions about that. We had questions about why exactly is that director sign-off happening? And there were some questions about when it's supposed to be implemented exactly. So let me touch on those things that's a little more. Oh, and also there was a question about, are there any cliff notes from this presentation? And there are, and we'll talk about those here at the beginning. All right. So this is that first chapter on the required improvements where we talked about the additional things that need to be added on a 3R project. If they're not included, then the director has to sign off on this. And so one of the questions we had was, does this mean that the director is now signing off on a design variation? And the answer is no. The design variation process has not changed. So whoever would normally sign off on that design variation still needs to do that. But what's changed is that if you decide to do a design variation because you cannot provide any of these 9 things, that now the director basically is signing off that we're not including that in the scope. And then that allows whoever has to do the variation to go forward and do the variation. And the variation would need to include, yeah, the director said that we weren't including this. And here's the reasons why, and that, that's my variation. Again, this was already in there, so these are things that already were supposed to have that director level approval if you didn't do them on the project, and these are the new things that we added. A few reasons for this. One was that when we began doing the bicycle pedestrian quality assurance reviews over the last couple of years, what we found is that when you look at the department on paper, we look really good. We're meeting our design criteria for bicycle and pedestrian facilities. And so we would go through and say, wow, your district met all the criteria for bicycle pedestrian facilities, you know, that you're doing a great job meeting criteria. The way they were meeting the criteria a lot of times is through a variation. And so they would say, well, there's no room for a sidewalk or for a bicycle lane or any kind of facility on this particular project. So I wrote a variation to say that I couldn't do them because there wasn't room. I met criteria with my variation. But at the end of the day, there was still no sidewalk or there was still no bike lane. And this is how we get to the year 2022 from the year 1985 when the routine accommodation law was signed that said that we had to provide these facilities everywhere. We're now how many years on, and we still don't have these facilities on some of our roadways. And part of it is because, you know, we're able to meet these using this variation. Now the variation process is there so that we can move our projects ahead because we've got stuff to get done. We have a legislative mandate to keep our roads resurfaced to a certain level, and we're meeting that. Yet there was kind of this hole that it looked like, you know, we were doing a really good job with these things, but maybe we really weren't. We got to digging into that to see why that was happening. And so what was happening is when we do a project, we were putting our project managers in a bit of a bind because we're telling them in the FDM, you have to provide bike facilities and all these things, but somebody else is telling them that you have to meet schedule and budget on your project, which is true. They do have to meet schedule and budget on their project. So what are they supposed to do? You know, there's no real incentive to them to actually provide these facilities. It's a lot better for them just to do the variation and move on with it. However, that may not always be the best thing for us to do. So the notion here was by advancing that decision to not do any of these three things up to the director level, it kind of gets it out of the hands of the project manager and the person responsible for that. And so they can say, look, I'm doing everything I can. The director said, I don't have to do it, it's going to be a variation. Or they may say, the director said, we are going to do it, and therefore we're going to have to find more money, or we're going to have to extend the project, whatever it might be. That's coming from the director, not from the PM. So the notion was to kind of spread that responsibility out and give folks a little help so we're not putting them in this bind, and let the directors get involved because they can hopefully see more of the big picture and help make those kind of decisions. So that was some of the rationale for making this, and hopefully it will get us out of this cycle that we've got where we're you know, meeting things with variations and criteria but we're still not providing the facilities there. So that's where some of this was coming from. So I hope that answers some of those questions about what's going on exactly with this director sign off and why we're doing that and what that is. Keep in mind, this was already happening for these items here. This is just the new stuff that we added in these conditions. All right. The question about implementation. So when we released the document, RDB 2201, we said that the requirements are effective immediately on all design bid build projects for which the project has not yet been advertised. There was some confusion about, which advertisement that actually is. So this has been, what it should have said is advertised for design. If it's already been released and you're doing advertisement for construction, it's way too late to go back and try to incorporate all these high-level things from FDM 114 into a project at that point. What this is really saying is if you've not released it for design yet, then you need to try to get these FDM 114 changes incorporated before you scope that project out and send it out and advertise it for design. That's the idea behind that. You can do it sooner if you want at the discretion of the district, but or you can do it after it's been advertised at the discretion of the district. But this advertisement time is the design advertisement, not the one for construction. So hopefully that answers that question. And are there cliff notes? We covered a lot of stuff today, and we actually have a 2 or 3 page guide. It's 2 pages, and I think the last page is a copy of the Safe Systems approach that describes what these changes are. Kind of goes line by line, so you can go to to a particular section and see what the changes were. For for yourself and make sure that you're aware of those. And so I've sent this to Brian Martin, and I believe he's going to send it out to all our attendees after the session is over today. So you'll kind of have that in your inbox, and we'll also put this on the website as well. All right. So that is the presentation that we have. I'm going to stop sharing my screen and turn my camera on. Brian, are you there?
I am indeed here. I've got you.
Okay, let's open up some questions here and see what we've got in the question box. And I have Michael and Gavin on the line as well. So if you guys have any questions that you would like to jump in and answer, feel free to do that. I guess I'll start at the top. Unless Michael or Gavin, are there any questions that you saw come in that you want to get first, or should I just start at the top and kind of work my way through? Looks like they're discussing it. Okay. All right, I'll just start.
We're using one mic because if we don't, it'll.
Okay. Oh yeah, you'll get the psychedelic echo. All right.
But there's, we've been looking at the questions. There's a lot of questions that are very similar in nature. Some of them regarding the safety needs list dashboard and how to access it. We're going to ask traffic operations for them to come up with a response for everybody. We need some clarification on that statement. We've had a lot of questions on that. The short answer is that consultants working on active projects will have the ability to request access from the project manager in the district, but we'll get you more specific details on that, and we'll probably be coming up from the traffic operations office who manages and supports that system.
Okay, thank you. I see a lot of questions here about the audio connection and maybe some of the video connection. I was getting weird pop-up messages myself from GoTo during the presentation. I hope everything sounded okay. I tried not stop presenting, but it was at one point I was told I was disconnected and things. So hopefully enough information got out there to folks. So I'm looking for questions that have not been answered yet. How does this affect permit coordinators? I think the permit coordinators are already expected to be familiar with the design criteria. This really does not change any of the FDM criteria outside of 114. So whatever you were following for that is sort of already there. So I don't know they would necessarily have a huge impact on the permit coordinators, but if somebody else has a different answer to that, you're welcome to offer it. Another question, is a presentation available for download? Brian, we'll have this available on the on the website, right? At some point, it's recorded.
The recording, yeah. But if you want to take your slides, and that's a separate thing.
What I can do is PDF that and put it out there, and we will probably have it on the Complete Streets website as well, or maybe on the FDM website. So there should be several places to get to it. And that's the same question. Just looking through here. Yeah, I see some more issues with the audio. I think that we're having some kind of computer connectivity issue this morning at the Burns building, perhaps. Where can we find
was a little bit odd.
Was it? Okay, sorry.
But I mean, we had
really
over 800 people on.
That's what it sounded like. Okay.
There were over 800 people on. There were a handful that had it, and I apologize for that. Other than I always blame it on Russian hackers. But I don't know. Maybe the go-to it's just a little rusty. We got to warm it up leading into our webinar series. So
and we have another one next week on the context classification guide. So maybe we'll be
and over 1,000 registered for that one as well.
Okay. So I have a question about where can we find the safety needs dashboard, and that is on the safety office website, and that actually is an internal thing that the districts have access to. I don't know that it's accessible external to the department, but as the districts are scoping their projects, they will have access to that and be able to get into that. If you are a district safety person and you don't know how to get a hold of that, you can contact us and we'll get you steered in the right direction for that. There's a hyperlink for the safety needs list, directs you to the Esri database. Yes, that's right. It basically directs you to an Esri internal database that you have to be inside of DOT to get to that. So that's why that is there. Lighting is only for mid blocks. Why not at intersections with crosswalks where the slides are made available later? Gavin, I'll take a stab at this, or Michael, and then you guys can correct me if I'm wrong. But basically, we already have pretty strong language about lighting at the intersections. There was some perceived to be some fuzziness about what was going on at the mid-block conditions, and that's why we wanted to enhance that. But I think we're already covered pretty well on what happens at the intersections. Is there?
I just want to also add to that, Dwayne, that again, as you mentioned at the beginning of the presentation, the criteria in the FDM didn't change. You know, that's where the triple R criteria is, not 114. Right. So 114 does not house the criteria for triple R project. It's a process. Right. And the main thing that we change is the director level approval if you can't do these things. So, you know, we've had a lot of questions on, well, how come we don't have criteria for this, that, and the other? It's in there in the chapters. That's where the criteria has been, and that's where it stays.
All right. Thank you, Gavin. I have a question here. So if we are working on a 3R project with an existing parallel sidewalk project with broken panels, then we would need to repair the broken panels, correct? Yes, we would like to see those broken panels repaired. And what's different now with in 114 is it makes it more clear that if you need to acquire right-of-way for that, you can do that as part of the 3R project. Now, again, it doesn't mean that you've got the money to do that. It doesn't mean that you got the time in your schedule to do that. But if you can get that money and get that time, you can certainly do it as part of your 3R project. That just wasn't clear before. We've done this for years. Districts have found issues like this and they've just gone out and fixed it. So again, this doesn't mean this wasn't happening, but it means that it's now explicitly called out in the FDM that yes, this is a process that we want you to follow, and it's fine to do those things if you can make it happen. If an existing strain pole is within this is for you, Gavin. If an existing strain pole is within the 10-mile range from the coastline but is not impacted by the proposed roadway improvements, is it still necessary to be replaced? You want to answer that on the fly, or do you need?
Well, we're in the process of going through that right now with another effort regarding Mast Arms and you know, the idea is that we want to be efficient with the money that we have, right? And so there's a certain area, you know, with the boundary to the coast, the distance to the coastline. But there's some criteria in the FDM saying that basically, if it's a brand new strain pole that the service life hasn't, you know, it hasn't really served its service life yet, then that might be questionable. So those things, we want you to do the right thing. There'll be more guidance coming out on this type of thing, you know, in the next few months, hopefully. So there's a task team working on that right now. So hang tight for that. But we want you to do the right thing. Have the discussion with your district and come to a consensus with them on what the right thing to do.
All right, thank you. And we had a question about if there is the requirement to and ability to do things for bicycle and pedestrian safety, would that apply if you to connected automated vehicles? If could you count that an improvement to make it easier for connected automated vehicles? Would that also count? The answer is we want you to go to the FDM criteria for bicycle and pedestrian facilities, and CAVs are not really a part of that. So right now it would not be. Now, if at some point in the future we determined that there was an element of connected automated vehicles that tied directly to bicycle and pedestrian facilities, and we included that in those chapters, then it would apply. But for now, the answer would be, go to those chapters, see what's in there. Those are the things you can do as a right, basically, now on a 3R project. There may be other things you can do as well, but certainly those are the things that we want you to be focused on right away. Okay. More questions about. Okay, there's a sidewalk question. Sorry, I lost my place when I was going down through here. A lot of folks asking about that safety needs dashboard. That's a popular thing. We'll have to let the safety office know that everybody wants to look at that guy. Let's see, can consultants access it? Not unless they have DOT access behind the firewall. Can you please clarify, does this new language provide an option to use 3R funds to address safety items, or is the intent that we shall expand the payment only scope to include the safety items as well? So what this means is, if you look at that first section that I went over, if you cannot include those bicycle and pedestrian safety items in there, then the director needs to sign off that you're not going to be able to do those things. The expectation is that you will provide those because that will meet FDM criteria on your project. And if you can't, then it goes to that director level sign off, and then you go and do whatever variations or that you need to do to not have those on your project. Let's see, is that a SAR necessary to implement safety improvements that are already coordinated through data from the safety department? I'm not sure I understand that question. Gavin, or you or Michael understand that question?
Well, if there's already been safety needs identified, I guess the question is, if there's already been safety needs identified, is there some safety, what was that SAR stand for? Safety assessment report required to make the changes.
Okay. Another question, how do you determine when right-of-way acquisition will be justified for improving bicycle and pedestrian facilities? That is a decision that would have to be made on a project by project basis. What the FDM 114 changes are doing is just saying that you can now use, you can now purchase that right away in a limited amount for this. A few things that are going to bracket that though. There's at some point you've acquired so much right away, or you need to acquire so much right away, that you're really not doing a 3R project anymore. You're doing some different kind of project. And so when you change that, when you cross that line, that's too much right away. The intention here really is that if you need to buy a few feet, like in the example I showed you there on that roadway, just to fill in a gap, that's the sort of thing that you could do. So that's the justification for it. Again, it doesn't mean that you're going to have the money to do it on your project or the time in your schedule to do it. But hopefully, now that you know that these things can be done, we can begin lining up the money and the time and the schedule if we know that we're going to have to require those things. And the goal is that over time, we can begin to fill in these gaps. Some of these gaps have been here for years and years, and multiple cycles of resurfacing, they just never get filled. We're hoping we can fill some of those in that way. What about PED lighting at signalized intersections? Can this be included? Again, I believe that PED lighting is already included at signalized intersections. If you have specific questions about that, you can send them to us and we'll try to help you help sort that out. Will the extra work construction cost be covered? Will it affect the, I'm sorry, I can't see. Will it affect the district's lane mile budget? I'm sorry, the question is, how will the extra work construction cost be covered? Will it affect the district's lane mile budget? So there is no new money for doing this. The money that we've got is the same money that we've had. So what you'll need to do is scope this as part of your regular work effort and pay for it, just like we do with everything else that we do on 3R projects. So what we've been told from work program, and Michael, feel free to jump in here, because I know you've had more conversations than I have with those folks about this, but essentially, the work program folks have told us that we want to do the right thing at the department, and they're asking you to use your best judgment, be wise in your what you think can get done and with the budgets that we have, and if you need, say how much it's going to cost, and then we'll do our best to help you make that cost and make that happen. And if we can't do something, then we'll let you know. But they've committed to help us make those costs. We all recognize that right now we're sort of making up. We're in a kind of, the next few years we'll be in a makeup phase, if you will, for things that we haven't done ever sometimes on our system that need to be done. That's going to be more expensive. But as we get those things done, once I fill in that sidewalk gap, I don't need to fill it again next time. It's done now, right? So we'll see some initial costs. We're expecting that those will go up. But then it should even out as these things get finished and they become a part of our regular system, and so it won't seem like such a huge cost going forward. It'll kind of even itself out is the intention. So, Michael, did you want to say anything about the work program and funding these projects?
Dwayne, I think you did a good job explaining. Basically, we need to scope the projects appropriately, coordinate with the districts, and if there's additional needs, that needs to be coordinated with the work program office. But you know, there's another task group right now looking at lane mile allocation cost and that sort of thing. But the work program office and central office is here to support these changes. They were at the table. They were part of the team that helped develop the 3R language, and we won't always be able to do what we want to do. We just need to scope the project accordingly, appropriately, and see what we can do. And if there's additional needs, coordinate that with the work program office.
Right. We can't, on a 3R project, we can't completely, you know, tear up and reconstruct a suburban roadway, you know, for speed management. That's clearly not going to work. Can we, you know, can we narrow a lane? Can we add some audible pedestrian or mid-block crossing signals? You know, things like what can we do? Do your best to scope the things that you think can be done that are reasonable, that are prudent. That's what work program has said that they want to help us fund, so they can do that. I have a note here from Dean Stoddard, the state landscape architect, that landscape and irrigation can now be included on 3R projects up to $200,000 under limited conditions. Thank you, Dean, for letting us know that. Where the right, let's see, where I think it says, maybe it says where the right-of-way is wide and existing sidewalk is at the right-of-way line, will you relocate the sidewalk so access to bus stops can be earlier? In addition, there are ditches that separate sidewalks from roadside bus stops. Will you bridge the gap in the project? So it sounds like this is about a very specific condition. However, in general, these are the kinds of conditions that we want to address on a 3R project. So, you know, under what's in 114, you would identify that as a need and you would scope it as something to be fixed and see where that goes. And hopefully we can get that funded and done, but it should be done. It's certainly doable. And now it should be crystal clear that we expect you to do that kind of thing on your 3R projects. That should be a part of what you're trying to get done. A mid-block is only one crossing, an intersection has 4. Shouldn't that be included? I think that was related to the lighting issue. And again, I think that's already covered under the lighting chapter. Section 114.1.1 is not the one on FDM 22 and 22. Okay, so sorry, I should have mentioned this. So if you go to the FDM website where it has a list of all the chapters, the chapter that comes up when you click on chapter 114 is actually the original chapter that was released in November. Next to that, there's a link for the roadway design bulletin. That, when you see that, whenever you see that laid out that way, you need to check what's in that bulletin because it's probably going to change what the original chapter was. That's why we released the bulletin. And so if you click on the bulletin, it'll come up and all the language that you need, the new language that's going to replace the old language is actually in that chapter. It's in the bulletin. So you need to click on the bulletin, not the chapter itself. And that's true, I think, pretty much for anything that you see on that FDM website.
Yeah, it has to do with the implementation. So everything that's in the FDM that was released in November and effective for projects beginning design January 1st. However, the bulletins have a different implementation schedule. And so that's why we do it that way. And it'll eventually roll into the FDM for next year. And it will be in the 114 chapter next year.
Okay. I have a question. I thought I had covered this, but I evidently did not do as good a job as I'd hoped. What was the reasoning for requiring director level permission for these 3R items when other items for variations are approved at the DDE level? And the reason for that is the variations will continue to be approved at that DDE level. The reason for that was that we wanted to make sure someone above that variation level was aware that these things are not being done. And it's not anybody's fault. We're not saying, you know, that they're doing the variations because they don't want to do the right thing. It's that they are really put in a bind between meeting schedule and budget and having to meet the FDM criteria. And it's not their fault to be there. And so that needs to be someone above them needs to be aware of that. And so they can make the call about, yes, I want you to bust the budget on this so that we can provide these facilities, or we just can't on this one, and you can go ahead and write the variation and go do your thing on the variation. And so that's why that's what was put in there, is to hopefully get us better compliance on those things over time.
Dwayne, that was a very good explanation. That is exactly right. Thank you. That's perfect explanation.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay.
And in addition to that, you know, when the directors see the challenges and they recognize, oh, hey, this is a big challenge, they have, you know, the secretary's ear, and it gets higher up and bigger changes can be made at that point. You know, we want them to see those challenges.
It came apparent to me when we were looking at the QARs, and I began to see over and over again that we were just doing these variations. And you know, I know the people doing the work. They're folks who are trying to do the right thing. They just were put in a bind; they couldn't do it. So if that is happening over and over again, it needs to be. We need to be aware of it and see if there's a way that we can fix it. And that's not their job to go out and figure that out. Somebody else above them needs to figure that out. So that's why we kicked it up to that level. I have a question here from David Agasinski. This work will be included in sequence 5201 and not in 5202, which is subject to not being funded. That is a question. And I believe that would just depend on how that sequence was funded. I'm not a work program person, so I can't tell you exactly what the answer to that would be. We can get back to you on that. So Brian, can we flag that question, and we'll try to get an answer back to David on that. Sorry, I'm trying to get through as many of these as I can. We're almost out of time. A lot of these are complaining about the audio. I'm sorry about that. ADA. Okay, question for Dwayne. Landscaping is a proven traffic calming element. Why has the 1.5% allocation been excluded from 3R projects? I think that gets back to the question that Dean had. The point he made to us that we can now include that up to 200,000. So I believe that was to address this issue. So we do know that you can use it for safety, and we'd like to see that done. And so we should be able to do that. If you think that that's not the case, let me know, and we'll try to track it down and see what's going on with it. Sorry, some of these questions are kind of long. Let's see. Can you clarify what is to be done during scoping by the department and what during design by the consultant? As much as can be done by the department during scoping should be done. At the very least, during scoping, you know, we need to see that the context classification has been understood. We need to see if there's going to be any need for speed management. All those things need to be kind of nailed down. Then it goes to the consultant to do the design, and then they have those things to work from, so they can do their design properly, and they're using the right speeds. They know that there's maybe a place where we need to have a mid-block crossing. They know there's transit stops, whatever it might need to be. All that needs to be nailed down before it goes to that design consultant. What funds are these being implemented under? Whatever funds you've got. So this is the same money. There's no new money under this. This is however you're paying for things now. That's the same money that we'll be using. And I think I described earlier how our work program is committed to help us make the changes that need to be made. Let's be prudent about it, but they want to see this happen as well. How does traffic engineering study you talked about relate to an ICE study? It could be something that would be done as an ICE study. Normally, the traffic engineering studies that are in the FDM are the kind that you would do to, say, for instance, justify a mid-block crossing or to make a change to a signal operation, something like this. So it's that level of study. Some of those rise to the level of ICE, some of them don't. You just really kind of have to look at it on a case-by-case basis, I think is the answer to that. And I think we're out of time, Brian. We're at the end of our hour. So sorry we didn't get to all the questions.
I'll download it. I'll send you the thing, so you'll have a copy of all of these if you want to reach back out to somebody, or everybody, you know, should know exactly who you guys are, and they can send you something directly as well if it's that critical. Other than that, well done. Thank you, gentlemen, and I'll get you those reports right after this. Just go ahead and say your goodbyes, and we'll close it on out. And I hope everybody has a great Wednesday.
Thank you, everyone. Good luck, and we appreciate you tuning in to hear about FDM 114. Thanks.